Welcome to the Wednesday Word of the Week. This week we're looking at a word that we found in Sunday's episode of Koine Corner, where Paul talked about fighting wild beasts in Ephesus. So the word today is thereomakeo, which means I am forced to fight with wild beasts, or I fight wild beasts. The notion of being forced is usually included because who in their right mind fights wild beasts of their own volition? You're fighting wild beasts because you're attacked by wild beasts, or if you've been thrown to the lions in the Colosseum as a punishment or as entertainment for the masses. So let's dig in. We'll take a look. If you haven't watched Sunday's Koine Corner on 1 Corinthians 15, 32, and 33, you may want to pause here and go watch that first to put yourself in the context, but if not, that's fine. You're not going to get lost here. So in 1 Corinthians 15:32, Paul says, "What advantage is it to me if, as men say, I fought wild beasts in Ephesus, if the dead are not raised?" So the context is, why would I put myself through such struggles if in fact there is no resurrection? If there's no resurrection, there's no point in me sacrificing my life like this to convince you of the gospel, because you're going to wind up just as dead as if you'd never heard the gospel. So the phrase in question, I fought wild beasts in Ephesus, ethereomakesa en Epheso. I fought wild beasts in Ephesus. So let's take a look. Ethereomakesa is an aorist tense. It's in the past. I fought wild beasts. It comes from thereomakeo, I fight wild beasts, or I am forced to fight wild beasts. And the two words that make this word up are therion, wild or dangerous beasts. So there are other words to talk about, like ruminants. We don't think of a cow as a wild beast, or a donkey as a wild beast. We're talking about, lions and tigers and bears, right? We're talking about the scary stuff. And the second word is makomai. I do battle, or I fight. There's a related noun, make, and that just means battle. So in Sunday's Koine Corner, I suggested that Paul's use of this word is figurative. And there are, it's widely accepted that this is a figurative use. It's a metaphor, that the wild beasts in question are actually hard-headed people, fierce opponents that he's had to struggle with in Ephesus, and not animals per se. There are, however, a few prominent sources, and this is quite a few decades ago, that advocated for this to mean real wild animals, that Paul fought wild animals. I'd like to give you 4 reasons why I think that's unlikely. And the first one goes back to verse 32, where Paul uses this phrase, kata anthropon. And what we know in our study of Koine is that kata anthropon frequently introduces a metaphor or a figure of speech. It's like, it's if I were to say, I got, as they say, Montezuma's revenge. Well, I've never met Montezuma. Montezuma has no grudges against me. We know that the phrase Montezuma's revenge is a metaphor for something else, right? So when you say, as people say, Montezuma's revenge, not really Montezuma, not really revenge. Something totally different, perhaps more unpleasant than Montezuma's revenge. But that's the first reason. Kata anthropon introduces a metaphor, introduces a figure of speech. He's telling his listeners that when he says, I fought wild beasts in Ephesus, that he doesn't mean literal wild beasts, he means something else. Most likely, people who are fierce opponents in Ephesus. The second thing is we know that Ephesus was a major metropolis. It was one of the biggest cities, most occupied, vibrant center of commerce in the Roman Empire. This was a booming metropolis. And Paul says, I fought wild beasts in Ephesus. He doesn't say I fought wild beasts in order to get to Ephesus or on my way to Ephesus or upon leaving Ephesus. He says I fought wild beasts in Ephesus. The likelihood of there being wild beasts, dangerous animals roaming the streets of Ephesus is highly unlikely. So from the notion of him having a chance encounter with wild beasts is pretty much off the table inside the city of Ephesus. So, kata anthropon, this is a figure of speech. Inside Ephesus, stumbling across wild beasts, unlikely. What else could happen? Well, we know that there was a Roman punishment called ad bestias, to the beasts. That would be done to prisoners, criminals, slaves for entertainment in the Colosseum, in the games. They had games in Ephesus and all the other major cities as well, and to dispense with captured foreigners, the barbaroi, the barbarians, could be thrown to the beasts. As a punishment or punishment as part of entertainment in the circus. But what we also know about that punishment is that you couldn't do that punishment to a Roman citizen. And we know that Paul, in his own words, is in fact a Roman citizen. In order for Paul to be punished ad bestias, thrown to the beasts in Ephesus, he first would have to have his Roman citizenship stripped away. But we know that later on in his ministry, when being thrown in jail without a trial, he invokes his citizenship and demands the trial that's due to him as a Roman citizen. So we must conclude that at this point, early on, his Roman citizenship has not been stripped and he has not been thrown to the beasts. One more nugget. It's almost inconceivable that one would be ad bestias, thrown to the beasts, and survive to tell the tale. Right? That's not what happened in the Colosseum. That's not what happened in the circus. If you were thrown to the lions, despite the movie Gladiator, are virtually undefeated. So we can set that aside. And the fourth and final reason that we can conclude that it's almost certainly a figure of speech and not a literal fighting with wild beasts is neither later on in Acts or in 2 Corinthians, when he references his time in Ephesus, does Paul make any mention or does Luke in Acts make any mention of Paul fighting literal wild beasts? So for all those four reasons combined, I think it's safe for us to conclude it's a figure of speech, it's a metaphor. He was dealing with fierce opponents in Ephesus because Ephesus is a major metropolis, not wild beasts roaming around. That Paul as a Roman citizen is not being thrown to the beasts ad bestias as a punishment in the circus, and it would have been written down elsewhere, and he wouldn't have survived to tell the tale. We can conclude that that the word of the week this week is telling us about a metaphorical encounter with opponents to the resurrection and to the other tenets of Christianity that Paul wrestled with, fought with, battled with in Ephesus. Hope that was good for you. It was always good for me. I love this language and its intricacies, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Until then, Charis Kai Reine Humane, grace and peace to you.